There was a box of wrapping paper scraps under the tree, and my daughter was folding the torn pieces into little squares, smoothing them flat on her knee like she was trying to make something out of nothing. That's the image I keep coming back to. Not the moment my husband stood up. Not the silence after. Just Lily, 9 years old, sitting cross-legged on her grandmother's carpet, folding garbage into something that looked like a present, because every other kid in that room had one and she didn't. My name is Rachel Doyle. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a claims adjuster for a regional insurance company, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days reading through other people's worst moments and figuring out what's actually owed to them. I've done it for 11 years. You'd think that would prepare a person for anything. It didn't prepare me for my own family. This story cost me a marriage I thought was solid as a poured foundation. It cost me a relationship with a woman I called mom for a decade. But it gave my daughter something I don't think she ever had before, which was proof that somebody would stand up for her, all the way, without blinking. If you're new here, this channel is where I tell the things that happened to me plainly, the way you tell a friend across a kitchen table, no music swelling, no need to make it bigger than it was. So pull up a chair. This one takes a while to get to where it's going, but I promise it gets there. I need to back up about 4 years, because you can't understand what happened that Christmas without understanding what came before it. I married into the Doyle family when I was 26. My husband, Mark, is the youngest of 3 boys, and his mother, Carol, is the kind of woman who runs a household the way a foreman runs a job site, everything counted, everything in its place, everyone accountable for their assignment. She raised 3 sons mostly on her own after her husband died young, and she did it through sheer force of organization. I respected that about her, genuinely. The first few years, I thought I'd lucked into a mother-in-law who actually liked me. Mark's brothers are Patrick and Sean. Patrick married a woman named Denise, and they have 2 boys, twins, Caleb and Owen, who are 12 now. Sean is divorced, and his daughter Maddie lives with his ex-wife most of the year but comes for the holidays. Maddie is 11. So that's the cousin pack. Caleb, Owen, Maddie. And then, 4 years ago, Lily came into the family when Mark and I had her. Here's the part where I have to be honest about myself, because I told you at the start, this isn't a story where I get to be the perfect one. Lily isn't Mark's biological daughter. I was married before, very briefly, in my early 20s, to a man who left when I was 4 months pregnant and has had no contact since. Mark met me when Lily was 8 months old. He didn't hesitate. He didn't treat her like a package deal he was tolerating. He showed up to every pediatrician appointment, every preschool function, and the day Lily turned 5, he asked me, completely serious, completely calm, if he could legally adopt her. I said no. I want to sit with that for a second, because it matters. I said no, and my reasoning at the time felt sound to me. I told him there was no rush. I told him her biological father might resurface someday and I didn't want a legal mess. I told him love didn't need paperwork to be real. All of that was true, in a way. But underneath it, if I'm honest with myself the way I get paid to be honest about strangers' insurance claims, I think I was scared. I think some small ungenerous part of me thought, if it's not official, I still have full control. Nobody can ever tell me how to raise her. Not even the man who loved her like his own. I didn't see, back then, what that choice would cost her. I do now. Mark let it go because that's who Mark is. He never brought it up again unless I did. He called her his daughter to anyone who asked, no qualifiers, no asterisks. On paper, though, on every form that mattered, Lily Doyle was actually Lily Bennett, my maiden name, with no legal father at all. Carol knew. Of course Carol knew. Carol keeps the family the way she keeps her checkbook, balanced, reconciled, nothing left unaccounted for. And somewhere in that meticulous ledger of hers, my daughter had always been entered as a different kind of entry than the other grandchildren. Not malicious, I told myself for years. Just precise. Carol was a precise woman. I should have paid closer attention to what precision can curdle into, when it's never checked. The Christmases at Carol's house were always the same, every year, like a liturgy. Her house out in the Ridgewood part of town, the one with the wraparound porch and the wreaths she hung the same week every November. Patrick and Denise would come in from 2 towns over with the twins. Sean would drive in from the city with Maddie if it was his year to have her for the holiday. Mark and I would bring Lily. Carol cooked a turkey and a ham both, every year, because she said a house should never run short on food for guests, even though we were never guests, we were family, but that was just how she talked. After dinner, she'd disappear into the back room, the room she called her wrapping room, which was really just a converted laundry room with a folding table, and she'd come out with the gifts. She always did the gifts herself, every year, no matter how many times Denise offered to help. She picked them, wrapped them, labeled them in her square, deliberate handwriting, and handed them out one at a time, calling each kid's name like she was reading off an honor roll. Caleb. A gift. Owen. A gift. Maddie. A gift. Every year, when she got to Lily's name, there was a gift too. A small one, sometimes, compared to what the boys got, but a gift. A stuffed animal one year. A coloring set another. Nothing extravagant, but something. I noticed the gap in value over the years and I let it go, because I told myself that's just how some grandmothers are, that's not proof of anything, don't go looking for proof of things you don't want to find. This past Christmas, Lily was 9. Caleb and Owen were 12. Maddie was 11. Carol disappeared into her wrapping room like always, and came out with her arms full like always, and started calling names like always. Caleb. A box, heavy enough that he had to set it on the floor to open it. A gaming console. Owen. The same box, same weight. Matching console. Maddie. A tablet, brand new, still shrink-wrapped under the paper. Then Carol set the rest of the stack down on the side table, smoothed her hands on her slacks, and said, "Well, that's everyone," and went to go check on the ham. I remember the room going strange. Not loud. Quiet in the wrong way. Denise looked at me. Patrick looked at the floor. Sean cleared his throat and said something about getting more ice. Mark was sitting next to Lily on the couch, and I watched his face change in real time, the way a sky changes before a storm you can see coming from a long way off but can't stop. Lily didn't cry. That's the thing that still gets me. She didn't make a sound. She just looked at the 3 piles of torn wrapping paper around her cousin's feet, and then she looked down at her own empty lap, and then she picked up a scrap of red wrapping paper from the floor near her foot and started folding it. Folding it into a little square. Smoothing it on her knee. Folding it again. That's the image. That's the one I can't put down. I need to tell you what Mark did, because it's the center of this whole story, and it's the reason I'm not divorced right now, and it's the reason I will love that man until the day I die, even though I have plenty of complicated feelings about how we got here. Mark stood up. Not fast. Not a jump to your feet kind of stand. He stood up the way you'd stand up to go check on something in another room, unhurried, like there was no question in his mind about what came next. He said, "Mom." Carol turned around from the kitchen doorway. "What, honey? Did you get something for Lily?" And here's where I want you to understand the kind of man my husband is, because he didn't yell that question. He asked it the way you'd ask someone if they remembered to lock the car. Genuinely curious. Giving her every chance in the world to say, "Oh, I forgot it in the other room, hold on." Carol's face did something I'd seen before, in small flashes, over the years, and never let myself name. A tightening around the mouth. A little lift of the chin. The look of someone who has decided something is fair and is bracing to defend that fairness. "Mark," she said, like his name was the whole answer. "We can talk about this later." "We can talk about it now," Mark said. Same calm voice. "Did you get something for Lily?" "She's not." Carol stopped herself. Started again. "I get gifts for my grandchildren, Mark. You know that." The room went dead silent. Patrick's twins had gone still on the floor, 12 years old enough to understand exactly what their grandmother had just said and not said. Maddie was looking back and forth between the adults with her tablet still in its box on her lap, untouched now. Denise had her hand pressed flat against her own chest like she was trying to hold something in. "I want to be fair to Carol here, because I promised you this isn't a story with a cartoon villain, and it isn't. Carol was not a cruel woman in the way that word usually means. She was a woman who had decided, somewhere along the way, in some private ledger she never shared with anyone, that family was a thing defined by blood and paper, and that without the paper, you were something adjacent to family but not quite inside it. She never said any of that out loud before that night. She didn't have to. She'd been quietly, consistently, for 4 years, drawing a line so faint that I'd talked myself out of seeing it, and then on one ordinary Tuesday in December, the line became impossible not to see. Sean, to his credit, was the one who said, "Mom, come on, she's family, that's not what you mean, right?" And Carol, instead of backing down, instead of softening it the way I think she could have, dug in. She said, "I love that little girl. I do." But Mark never made it official. "That was a choice you two made. I didn't make that choice. I'm not the one who has to answer for it." There it was. The whole thing, laid bare. For years of a faint pencil line, and now it was traced over in pen, in front of everyone, in front of my daughter, who was still folding that scrap of red paper into a smaller and smaller square, not looking up. This is the moment in the story where, if you've watched enough of these channels, you expect somebody to start shouting. You expect a table to get flipped, a door to slam, somebody to scream, "How dare you," and storm out into the snow. That's not what happened. And honestly, by then I'd done my own job long enough to know that the moments that actually break people open are never the loud ones. I've sat across from people whose houses burned down who never raised their voice once, just sat very still and asked very precise questions, because precision is the only thing left to hold on to when everything else has gone. Mark walked over to the couch. He crouched down in front of Lily, at her eye level, the way you'd kneel down to check on someone who'd fallen. He didn't say anything to her about the gifts. He just picked up her hand, the one still holding the folded scrap of paper, and held it for a second. Then he stood back up, faced his mother, and said 2 sentences. Just 2. No raised voice. No shaking. "She's my daughter. I'm not going to explain that to you twice." That was it. That was the climax of the whole evening. Not a fight. Not a scene. 2 flat, calm sentences from a man who had clearly decided something a long time before he ever said it out loud. Carol opened her mouth like she had more to say, and then closed it again, because there really wasn't anywhere to go after that. You can argue with anger. You can't argue with someone who has simply stated a fact and is done discussing it. Denise was the witness. I want to give her that, because she's the one who, weeks later, when people were trying to rewrite what happened, told it exactly the way it was, without flinching and without softening it for anyone's comfort. She told me later, over coffee at her kitchen table, "I've sat in that living room every Christmas for 14 years and watched your mother-in-law decide who counts. I never said anything because it was never my fight. But watching that little girl fold up trash because she didn't want anyone to see her hands were empty, I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it clear as day." Mark did the only thing that could have been done. He didn't even raise his voice, and it was still the loudest thing I've heard in that house in 14 years. That's the kind of witness you want in your corner. Not someone who fights your battles for you. Someone who simply refuses to let the story get blurry later. Here's where my profession comes into it, because I told you a skill should be the thing that actually solves the problem, not just the feelings underneath it, and mine did. In the weeks after Christmas, Mark didn't sit me down and demand we fix the adoption thing immediately out of spite or to win some argument with his mother. That's not how he operates, and frankly, I don't think it would have meant much if it came from anger. But we did sit down, the two of us, at our own kitchen table, with a legal pad, and we talked about it honestly for the first time in 4 years. I told him the truth about why I'd said no back when Lily was 5. Not the polished reasons. The real one. That I'd been scared of losing control, scared of giving away even a sliver of the absolute authority I had over my daughter's life, because some wounded part of me from my first marriage never fully let go of the fear that men leave, eventually, even good ones, and I didn't want to be left holding paperwork that said otherwise. Mark didn't get angry about that either. He just said, "I'm not him. I never have been. And I think the only person that timeline ever protected was you, not her." He was right. That stung in the particular way that being seen clearly by someone who loves you can sting. I'm a claims adjuster. My whole job is documentation, making sure the right paper trail exists so that when something goes wrong, there's no ambiguity about who's responsible for what, who's owed what, who belongs to what. I had spent 11 years building airtight files for strangers and had left a 4-year gap of ambiguity sitting right in the middle of my own family, the one place it actually mattered. So we filed for the adoption. Properly, this time, no hesitation on my end. It took about 5 months, the home study, the court date, all of it. On the day the judge signed the final order, Lily asked if her last name was really changing to Doyle now, for real, on everything, and Mark told her yes, and she said, very matter of fact, the way 9-year-olds say the most devastating things without meaning to, so now nobody can say I'm not really part of the family. That's the emotional core line of this whole story. Carol said something cold in that living room, but it was my daughter, months later, in the front seat of our car after a court appearance, who said the sentence that actually carries the whole weight of what happened. Nobody can say I'm not really part of the family. Like it was a fact she'd needed someone to officially certify, because the unofficial love, real as it was, had never quite felt safe enough to stand on. I won't pretend the fallout was clean or satisfying in some triumphant way, because it wasn't, and I promised you I wouldn't dress this up bigger than it was. Carol didn't apologize that night, or the week after. It took almost 2 months before she called me directly, not Mark, me, and asked if she could come over. She sat in our living room, a different one this time, ours, smaller, less impressive than hers, and she said she'd been doing some thinking. She said her own mother had drawn lines like that, between blood grandchildren and step-grandchildren, back when Carol was young, and Carol had sworn she'd never be like that, and then had gone and done it anyway without fully realizing it. Because some patterns get handed down so quietly you don't notice you're holding them until somebody else has to live with the weight. I believe that was true. I also believe it doesn't erase what Lily felt sitting on that carpet folding garbage into squares. Both things are true at once. That's usually how it goes with real people instead of movie villains. Carol has tried since then. She gets Lily gifts that match her cousins now. Every year, no gap, no asterisk. She's never once, in the year and a half since, slipped back into that old line. I notice these things. It's my job to notice patterns, remember. Mark and I are fine. Better than fine, actually. There's something that happens to a marriage when you watch your spouse stand calm and unmovable in defense of your child. Something that settles deep into the foundation in a way that ordinary good days never quite reach. I don't take him for granted anymore. I haven't since that night. Lily doesn't talk about the Christmas with the empty lap. She's 9, almost 10 now, and kids that age process things sideways, in pieces, when you least expect it. But she kept that folded scrap of red wrapping paper. I found it in her jewelry box, the little square, still folded after all this time, sitting next to a hair clip and a friendship bracelet. I never asked her why she kept it. I think I already know. Sometimes the proof we need isn't the gift. It's the moment somebody finally stood up and said you were never the thing that needed proving in the first place. If there's a lesson in all this, and I think there is, it isn't really about Christmas presents or even about Carol. It's about the quiet lines we let ourselves draw and redraw in our own families without ever stopping to ask who's standing on the wrong side of them. I drew one myself, for 4 years, out of my own fear, and I told myself it didn't matter because love doesn't need paperwork. But sometimes the people we love need the paperwork anyway, not because the love isn't real, but because the world keeps asking them to prove it is, and a 9-year-old shouldn't have to fold garbage into squares just to have something to hold on to while the adults around her figure that out. If you've got a story about a line somebody drew in your family, the kind nobody talked about until it finally broke open, I'd like to hear it in the comments. Sometimes saying it out loud is the first step toward redrawing it the right way. And if you want more stories like this one, told plain, no shouting, just the truth as it happened, go ahead and subscribe. I've got more of them to tell.